Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name's Jeff, and you're listening to episode 7 of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. Hello, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. Today's comic book is Secret Origins of the Legion of Superheroes and some supervillains too. This is a DC Digest book. So this is Best of DC Blue Ribbon Digest, number 33 from February 1983. Best of DC Blue Ribbon Digest. So let's talk about this for a second, because this is actually our first digest book. And I want to talk a little bit about this, because this is, you're probably going to see a lot of these. One of the first complete runs that I put together, or one of the first runs, the complete runs that I sought out as a collector later on. And I probably put this run together, I would say, about 8 or 9 years ago. I sought these books out about 8 or 9 years ago. And there's about 100 or so in the whole series of comics that were published by DC Comics. And these are digest books. So if you're at the supermarket next time and you're around the checkout and you look over at the books, the digest books, there's Reader's Digest, there's probably Soap Opera Digest, there's some puzzle books, there's some games. You've seen these. You've stood there at the checkout line in the supermarket and you've seen the books that they sell right there by the checkout. These are all digest, abridged, condensed books. In the, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, DC began experimenting with various DC had been experimenting with formats. One of the great things about comic books, and one of the things I'm kind of attracted to, is the various ways in which companies decided to experiment with the comic book format. The three big ones that come to mind are, the Giant, or the Spectacular, or the 100-page Super Spectacular. That's something that's near and dear to my heart. These are like 100 pages for 60 cents, or 80-page Giants, or Giant Size. Marvel would do these as Giant Size books. They were mostly reprints. You'd pay about 50, 60 cents or whatever the cost was at the time, and you would get, either 96 pages of they would be 100 pages, so it would be 96 pages of comics, and then you'd have the front and back cover and the inside front and back cover, so you'd technically be able to call them 100 pages. You had tabloid-sized books, which were the large, oversized books. We've already talked about the Bible. We've talked about some of those previously, and I've got a fairly large collection of all of the DC Treasury books. And then there's these, which are small, pocket-sized digests. The tabloid books were, early 70s experiments, to get comic books on magazine shelves, to get them on the newsstands where, normally comic books wouldn't appear. Comic books would appear on comic book spinner racks, or, there weren't a lot of other places where you could see them, and the Treasury books were a way to get comics into places where they, newsstands where they wouldn't normally be, and it was a way to collect stories and to sort of present them in a larger format. And digests were the similar idea, right? These are small books. They're pocket-sized books. They're, about 6 inches. They're about 6 inches by 4 inch, 4 by 6 inches. So they're kind of small, and they're thick. They're square bound, right? So these books are square bound books. They're about 100 and something pages, 100 pages or so. Typically with web offset printing. And when I say web, I don't mean like the internet, World Wide Web. What I mean is the way that comic books are printed is that they're printed on what's called a web press. These are big, giant rolls of paper, right? So you feed a web press. You don't feed sheets of paper like a printing press, or like what you would imagine. You see these printing press where they feed sheets of paper in, and they're just being printed on. These are web offset. They're called offset web presses, and they're how newspapers are printed typically. And you've probably seen them in movies where you see large rolls of paper that are being spun at real high speeds through a large printer. And this is typically how comic books are printed. Mostly exactly how comic books are printed. And in the early days, before nice formats and Baxter paper and things of that nature, these were all newsprint, and they were printed in the exact same manner in which newspapers were printed. And they get folded into quarters. So these books, if you've ever wondered why page counts are the way they are, it's because the books are folded into fours or quarters, right? They're folded over, and then they're folded over again, and then they're cut and they're trimmed, and then they're bound, and then they're shipped. So it's typically you see things like 32 pages or 64 pages or 96 pages. So that's typically why comic books come in those they come in that number of pages, is because they're divisible by 4. So and you fold over, and then you fold over again, and then you cut and trim and you bind, and that's how you make a comic book. So these books are regular newsprint on the inside. They're not anything nice, but they were at the time a really cool way to collect comics, right? So if I would have been an early teenager, out in 13 years old, maybe I was 12 years old, 13 or 14 or whatever, what have you. And these all represented, in my mind, and my 12-year-old and 13-year-old mind, these represented an economical way to get a lot of bang for your buck. These were you could get a lot of story for your money. You could spend $1 and you could get 100 pages, 95 cents or whatever it was at the time. And these books were reprints. So you have to imagine this is before comic book shops. Generally, this is about the time when comic book shops first started appearing on the scene. But it typically wasn't a comic book shop. You wouldn't go to a comic book shop and get comics. You would go to a supermarket or a drugstore, and these are, this particular issue, Secret Origins Legions of Superheroes is $1.50, right? So this is about $1, right? So you spend $1, you get a nice big thick collection of books, and this one, for instance, this particular issue has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stories, 7 individual stories in it. So you get a lot of bang for your buck, right? You could spend 35 cents on 7 comics, right? Or you could spend like $1.50 and get the equivalent of 7 comics. And this is these were all themed. So a lot of these books were reprints, and they were sort of themed reprints. Like you'd have, I don't know, in the DC Digest line, you have things like Christmas stories, best stories of the year, the year's best stories. So for 1983 or so, you could find a digest at the end of 1983 that would collect 1983's year's best stories, and it would be, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10 different comics in one square bound digest. And these are reduced size and they're small, and they were all themed. This is sort of like the secret origin. This is the secret origins of Legions of Superheroes. So you get, for instance, in this one, you get Timberwolf, Wildfire, Dawnstar, Lightning Lad, and Light Lass, Grimbor and Sharma, the Infinite Man, and Legion. So you get origin stories collected in a small, $1.50 sized comic book. And I as a kid, I liked the Legion of Superheroes. I thought they were pretty cool. I mean, I don't know necessarily that I would call myself a super fan of the Legion of Superheroes, but as a kid, I thought it was actually kind of cool that there were some teenage heroes from the future that had flight ring. I mean, who doesn't love a flight ring? They all were, when you become a member of the Legion of Superheroes, you get a flight ring. So, who doesn't want a ring that lets you fly? And then they were a club, right? They had a clubhouse. I mean, it was a little bit it was a less serious version, I guess, of the Justice League of America with some younger people, and they were all from different planets. So of course, this is in the far future. So there's all kinds of planets that have been discovered, and Earth is just one of a series of worlds where all of these different heroes come from, and you've got heroes from different planets that all come together and form a superhero club and fight galactic villains and fly through space and do all kinds of fun stuff. And you had Bouncing Boy and Lightning Lad, and you had all these great superheroes as a kid that you could just sort of just embrace and wrap your arms around and really get into. So Legion is kind of cool. So this is one of those books that fires on all cylinders, right? You got to imagine if you're like 12 or 13 years old, you got one, it's a cheap way to get a comic. Two, it's the Legion of Superheroes. So you got that going for it. Then three, it's Secret Origins, which are always great because it's sort of like you learn where all of these kids came from. So, if you're spending $1.50, it's a no-brainer, right? You get 7 or 8 stories, origin stories, reprints. You're only spending $1 on them. So it's great stuff. I mean, these are terrific books. And like I said, I spent probably a year or two, probably longer than that. I feel like it was probably a couple years just going back and hunting for these digest books. And DC at the time, but I guess between the late 70s and the early 80s, they probably printed about 100 different digest books of all kinds of genres. I mean, you would be astounded at the variety of these books. And there'll be plenty of time for us to get into more of these. Like I said, I've got the whole run, and they're just really near and dear to my heart, and I love having them, and I love reading them, and I love pulling them out and looking at them. So they're just terrific books to own. They're somewhat hard to find. It's kind of difficult to put a complete run of these books together. They're like treasury books. You never see them at conventions, and if you do, it's usually 1 or 2 people that are selling them out of a box to the side, or they have them displayed in some over back behind in a corner, so you have to kind of dig for them. I know you could go to any comic book convention. If you're going to a comic book convention this weekend, give it a shot. Walk around the convention and ask, do you have any digest books? Do you have any DC Digest? And again, it's probably going to be the same answer. It's, I've got some at the shop, but I never bring them to shows. But thankfully we've got eBay and we've got auction houses and we've got different ways to buy these books. So it's definitely something that you can find, but it just takes a little bit of effort, and I think that makes it all the more rewarding. So these are great books to own. They're fun. They're somewhat relatively affordable. They're not super expensive. There's a couple of them that have really low print runs. Those are the fun ones to try to find, and it's even more fun to try to find them in great condition. And they're odd ones too. I think one of the lowest printed ones is the name escapes me right now. It's like the forbidden the Forbidden Mansion, or the Mansion of Forbidden Love, or whatever that is. It's some crazy weird horror, love, romance genre. I can't remember exactly what the name is off the top of my head, but it's Hidden Mansion of Forbidden Love or something like that, I think. And it's just, crazy how hard those books are to find, some of the smaller print run of those books. So this is a great book. If you want to check this book out, you can head over to the website. The website is comicbookoftheday.com. If you want to catch a picture of this, or you want to maybe hunt this book down, I would highly recommend it. These are great books. You can follow along with us on Facebook at Comic Book of the Day. We're on Instagram, Comic Book of the Day. We've also got a Twitter account where we tweet and talk about various nonsense. So you can follow us on Twitter, CB of the Day on Twitter. So we've got a lot of places, but check out comicbookoftheday.com. That's where you can go see this comic book, and you can go judge for yourself. So in the meantime, this wraps it up for our Comic Book of the Day today. It's Best of DC Blue Ribbon Digest number 33, Secret Origins of the Legion of Superheroes and Some Supervillains 2. February 1983. Thank you once again for listening. We really enjoy doing this, and we're glad you listen. Join us again tomorrow for another Brave and Bold, but this time it is a Whitman variant. Now, what does that mean? We'll talk about it more tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you and have a great day.